Hello and welcome back to another short news video. This time we're looking at some interview summaries, and we're just basically going to be reading this thread because a lot of the interviews are in Japanese. They take forever to translate, and a lot of people already do that really successfully. So we're going to read through this by Carrier of Light that was posted on Reddit. I'll link this in the description. I obviously take no credit for this work. So we're just going to read through this and talk about the various things that were talked about in the Game Watch and 4Gamer interviews in particular with Yoshi P during E3 2019. First of all, it is worth noting that there is quite a lot of spoilers for the future content in this, as you might imagine, so don't watch this or don't listen to this if you don't really want any of those spoilers. So first of all, let's talk about Titania at E3. Apparently the North American community team strongly requested content from the expansion, and since Titania isn't so much of a story spoiler, they were able to sneak her in. Because they had so many battle system and job changes, like Impulse Drive being removed and the Chaos Thrust combo starting from True Thrust instead, Yoshi P told the NA community team that visitors will struggle with it and only expected 30% of them to clear it, but it actually ended up being lower than 30%, so they buffed the players on the second day. Which is interesting if you think about that for a second. In one of the other interviews we talked about yesterday, essentially he said they were quite lenient with the Titania fight that people could take part in, but for the most part I think it was just people having difficulty meeting DPS checks, and that was a result of all of the changes. So next up with new information is the possibility of a Final Fantasy VII collab. Yoshi P personally loves Final Fantasy VII, so they would love to if they had the opportunity. However, they would need to ask the Final Fantasy VII team, and Yoshi P doesn't want to disrupt or affect the game's launch. Even if they were to have a collab, he would like to discuss the collaboration after the Final Fantasy VII Remake's mastered version is ready, and when they are already in the marketing and PR phase. If Katase, which is Final Fantasy VII's director, approaches the 14 team first, they might do something at launch though. So there you go, a Final Fantasy VII crossover might be in the works. Very interesting. Next up, the discussion moved to regarding Final Fantasy VIII Remastered, which was obviously announced at the Square Enix conference itself at E3. Squall's outfit is already in the game, so it would be nice if they had something other than that, they say. With regards to the 5.0 raid Eden, since so many people are speculating references to Final Fantasy VIII, they don't want to betray those expectations. It's actually a coincidence, they say, that they announced a remastered version of 8 right as 14 started to have all of these 8 references. So yeah, we can expect Final Fantasy 8 references to keep going then. I'm personally a massive fan of this. It's my favourite Final Fantasy game if I had to put one on a numbered entry. I'm all kinds of excited now for Eden. So then they talk about the 5.0 launch trailer and story questions, so this is where those spoilers come in. Apparently the dark, creepy atmosphere that the trailer as a whole has is deliberate, and they wanted to express the stagnation and corruption of the first. The fat man who shows up in the middle of the trailer is the head or leader of Ulmor, and he cannot say if we'll be fighting him or not, but the fat man was provoking us, and he would like players to speculate if he's really just a friend of the Sin Eaters or being controlled by someone. 5.0 will explore the roots of Final Fantasy XIV's story. Most players who follow the story probably already suspected that Hydaelyn and Zodiac are primals, so he didn't mind revealing that minor info. Why? Because there are tons more surprises with a bigger impact. The dev team actually asked Yoshi P if it was really okay to reveal the final primal secret, and he said it was okay because that proves that the story is going to be that huge. 5.0 will answer a lot of the questions players have, such as why are the Ascians doing all of this in the shadows? Why is the world split into 14 shards? What is it about there being 6 elements and trying to cause calamities over and over again? The conclusion to the conflict between the allied nations of Garlemald in the 4.x series is just like a branch or a leaf of the whole picture. After halfway through 5.x, the story will unfold like a turmoil up to the end. If we were to label the story up to this point as the Hydaelyn and Zodiac part, 5.0 will finish up 80% of that story. They started doing this halfway through the 4.x series, and they tried to make the player get more involved, and Yoshi P continued to tell the devs to have proper effects and acting for the Warrior of Light during dialogue. Even simple additions like putting the camera in a different place, or having the camera focus on a candle during the dialogue to emphasize the meaning of their words can make it a little more interesting. So yeah, if we just sit for a second and take that in, it's interesting to see that, you know, the fact that Hydaelyn and Zodiac are primals and they're nonchalantly sort of saying that's, you know, a thing we already knew. Yeah, I mean, people speculated that. I speculated that myself, but it's still quite a large spoiler in, you know, at least from my perspective from the outside without seeing the rest of the picture. But, well, if this is the way that the story is going to go, it's going to be very exciting. And 80% of that storyline, like the core storyline with Hydaelyn and Zodiac, is going to be answered. That's a big deal. So next up, they say regarding the overworld. You'll basically be solving problems in each area, and after beating a certain something in each area, the area will regain night and weather. Time does not exist on the first, but the skies will always be bright at first. The weather and skies will change according to each player's progression, so some might see a dark night, while others are seeing a bright one. The cities on the first do have summoning bells and market boards, but those are used by people on the first, and the player's retainer is still on the source. The story will properly explain why you are able to summon retainers from the source and use the market board. The same goes to why you can use the duty finder to participate in duties on the source, and that will also be explained through the actual story. Usually, you know, games wouldn't really explain, they'd just say, well, it's a gameplay mechanic at the end of the day, and we need to have access to it. But instead, they're going to go through the storyline and explain these things and probably do a whole backstory of linking the world's market boards or something. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see how they do it, but that's exciting. They didn't need to do it, but it's nice that they did. Next up, the discussion talked about trusts. Trusts can be used in all of the main story-related instance dungeons in 5.0. There are no plans on allowing trusts to be available in other content. Even if they were to expand the trusts, they would be limited to instance dungeons, which means they might make them available in instance dungeons that aren't main story related in the future, but trusts won't be available in content such as raids and trials. They aren't currently thinking about allowing players to summon trusts in public areas. He said Y'shtola has her own adventures, so she can't be with you all the time. They still haven't decided if they want to expand the trust so that they would be available in the dungeons on the source, but that's going to be probably based on player feedback. To avoid new players from leaving the game, they understand that it's obviously better for trust to be available in all 2.0 dungeons. And that's the end of that section. That's interesting to bring up. This really would answer a lot of the problems with bottlenecking in early dungeons. Perhaps if we had like a queuing system, and if it couldn't find actual players after a certain amount of time, it actually took you into that main storyline dungeon from like 2.0, etc., and even Heavensward dungeons, and grouped you with trusts instead. That would be a really cool idea, but we'll have to wait and see how far this trust system goes and whether players actually give it enough feedback that they continue using it or not. So next up, they talk about Eden. The Eden storyline is extremely involved with the main scenario, but it's really hard to say anything because clearing the MSQ is a requirement to start the Eden story. After finishing the 5.0 MSQ, a certain character will involve themselves in the Eden story. They probably won't reveal anything regarding Eden during the next letter from a producer live. He specifically said that an issue popped up where a certain something we were not supposed to see yet shows up in the background. That's interesting. The difficulty of the Eden raid will be close to that of the creator, he says, which is Alexander floors 9 to 12. They expect players to not be used to level 80 jobs, so the required DPS will be lower than usual. Instead, the mechanics will be fancy, and might make up for the lower DPS checks to bring it back to the usual difficulty. And that's the section on Eden. So that's interesting. So there's something somewhere, maybe even in one of the trailers, that we see in the background of one of the scenes that we weren't supposed to see. I'm not really sure what that is. Maybe the throne in the scene with Innocence. Maybe we weren't supposed to see that because it looks a little bit like Xande's throne at the top of the Crystal Tower. Maybe, I don't know. That's really interesting. I'm going to speculate on that quite a bit, I would imagine. So next up, they talk about the Nier collaboration. The Nier raid is planned for 5.1, so they will be revealing information at the Tokyo Game Show. It's turning out to be a Nier-ish content. They actually just started developing it right about now, and the story and the plans for the bosses are almost decided, and they are starting to build it from there. So there you go. So they're actually starting with Nier. I'm not sure what he means by Nier-ish. Probably they're trying to, make it relative to the actual game we're playing, but we'll have to wait and see. That's all the hype. A lot of people I know are very excited for Dark Apocalypse, and with good reason. Now a little information about today's 50-second live letter, which is happening later tonight. They will talk about the changes to the battle system, jobs and mechanics, and also a lot of main storyline related info. They'll also talk about the changes to the Disciple of Land and Hand, including the new UIs will also be announced. They will also show new glamour, mounts, and talk about how the raid loot system will work, and the release schedule for 5.0 raids will also be announced in detail, which is that the normal raid will be 2 weeks after the official release, and the Savage raids are another 2 weeks later, and weekly tomestones being introduced alongside that. And lastly, this section from the first interview was on the rumoured new project. The new project that Yoshi P is involved in will not affect the development of 14. Yoshi P laughed about how the only difference is that he himself will become busier. He is about the only one working on both projects, because it is a new project after all. Apparently they will never do what they did in the past, which was where they updated 1.0 whilst creating 2.0. I guess they want to kind of avoid that situation again, because it's a lot of stress on a big team like that. And now they move on to the 4Gamer interview. So the first bit is regarding the amount of players. They say they already have double the amount of pre-orders compared to Stormblood. They are in such a good state where they'll be punished by God if they ask for more, they say. Hrothgar and Viera. The Hrothgar will be heavily involved in the Gunbreaker job quests. The Viera have their own village they protect, so you will find out about them there. They were careful to make sure the Viera village fits in the game, and he wants players to visit the village to find out about the lore and their lifestyles. And then there's a big section on Ishgard restoration. This is something that we haven't had information on until now. There will be a ranking system for the Ishgard restoration. He used the feast as an example and said there will be seasons for it. To avoid the same top tier players from dominating it every season, they designed it so that you can graduate and be done with it after you are rewarded for being top a single time. Those who want rare titles and flashy primary tools will need to level their jobs first, and then have the perfect gear and materia, and then challenge extremely difficult recipes. For those who only do battle content and don't gather or craft as much, the Ishgard restoration area does have ways in which those people can participate with lower level classes. There is a system where players can purchase a restoration ticket, which they can use to contribute to the restoration and also gain rewards from the lottery if they're lucky. After the restoration reaches a certain point, something like a seasonal event will be held irregularly, and you can participate in those to gain rewards. Each world, i.e. server, will have its own progression, so players can compete and race with other servers to restore Ishgard faster. You can also use the world visit system to take a look at other servers and see their progress. And finally here, there are plans on renewing Diadem and sticking it to the Ishgard restoration. So yeah, let's just take that in for a second. So this is basically a server-wide progression system, which a lot of people were kind of skeptical if they would actually go this direction, meaning that the entire server works together to restore Ishgard. It's interesting they will have combat-related roles for this restoration as well, but it does sound like a lot of fun. The interesting point at the end there is that they're bringing back Diadem and renewing it and making it a part of that system. Whether they actually do anything decent with that system is anyone's guess at this point, but it is exciting to see that they're thinking about redoing it and tacking it onto something they've never done before. The idea of seasonal sort of ranking systems for crafting. That sounds like a lot of fun personally, and I'm sure a lot of people will get into that. Next up, they say with the gatherers and crafters in particular, the Meister system is untouched and will still be there. Players will not need to worry about jet lag and time zone differences on the first. And that's probably in relation to timed nodes there, so maybe they're not going to exist on the first. That's very interesting. If that is the case, then I'm curious what they're going to do with those rare nodes, or how we get rare materials in general. Very curious. Next up, we talk about housing. No plans on adding new plots at the moment, but because there are so many new players and returning players rushing in at a speed that surpasses their expectations, they do feel the limit is close. Once 5.0 calms down, they will look into the timing in which it's possible to add more housing plots. Yoshi P was asked if it's possible to add a feature to check if there are open housing plots on other servers. He said it's impossible. There are currently no plans on increasing the amount of items you can place inside or outside of your house for a while. And there are no plans on adding a market board housing item because the servers will crash if everybody places them. The same reason applies as to why you can't place a summoning bell in your garden. Well, this spaghetti code really does limit the game, doesn't it? Jeez, I've had just the idea if you put a retainer bell in a garden, you're going to crash the server. Very interesting. Next up, they talk about the armory chest. They say they understand people are struggling to manage so much gear, including gatherer and crafter gear, but there's the problem of server traffic. When you use the duty finder to move to a different world, a note here, instance areas are regarded as different worlds or servers, your inventory is also regarded as data required to be carried over, and hundreds and thousands of players are moving around the ocean on the internet with that data. So increasing a single 1 bit or 2 bits can drastically inflate the amount of traffic. This affects the responses from the game, and it can lead to lag or your controls being delayed. Last time we upgraded the armory chest, we spent a whole year simulating the traffic and stress testing in the background, and then we were finally able to apply it to the game. They would love to add more slots, but when they consider the rapid increase of players and also consider adding housing plots on top of that, they need to do each task one at a time. And one of the last sections here is actually on New Game Plus. Apparently the new battle content in 5.0 will also be synced in the New Game Plus. The system's name is New Game Plus, but we also had players who wanted to play certain instance content again, so we made it so that you can replay 5.0 content again as well. And finally, the last little sections of miscellaneous, there's 3 of them. Firstly, that there's going to be brand new jump potions, including the story skip potion for Stormblood. These will be added alongside the early access period of Shadowbringers, and the current level 60 potions will actually be removed, and they will instead be level 70 jump potions in exchange. They say here to note, for those who are new to Final Fantasy XIV, the new jobs will most likely not have a jump potion, so please do not panic. The Square Enix store will start selling new physical security tokens, the Shadowbringers version on July the 2nd if you want to put an authenticator on your account, which I would totally advise in this day and age. The left-hand gamepad sold by Hori, which was supervised by Yoshi P, and they showed that in the last live letter at FanFest Tokyo, allows you to use the analog stick, and he confirmed that it also works for the PlayStation 4. And then finally we have a section from the Dengeki interview, a section on the main storyline here. This summary is really helpful. Yoshida was amazed at how players instantly realized that the scene where the planet is covered by a magic circle was a reference to Eden from Final Fantasy VIII. When they showed the pilot version of the trailer to the whole team, assistant producer M said, "This looks so normal. Why don't you add the scene where Eden covers the planet?" And so they did. Thankfully, players started speculating over it, and he thinks it was the right decision. The main story will have a previously on Final Fantasy XIV recap that isn't too annoying. The reason why 4.5 didn't end with a cliffhanger, because there were quite a lot of players who were saying, a cliffhanger ending again? After each expansion. They plan to make the end of Stormblood quiet and start 5.0 with a rush of events. But this time the players who finished Stormblood were saying, I was expecting a cliffhanger at the end, and they were able to receive precious feedback. When they reach the end of the 5.x series, they would like to challenge a dynamic ending again. In regards to the last boss, 5.0's last boss difficulty isn't higher than Shinryu, but they made sure to make it feel like a last boss. All they can say is a dramatic battle will be awaiting. In regards to instance dungeons, it says they have shifted from how should they strategize to how can we make it enjoyable to the players. They don't have the impression where the mechanics themselves feel harder, but they have organized surprises and real-time shifts in what the battlefield looks like. Most of the dungeons in 5.0 are main story quest related. They spent time on choosing the location, the need to go there, and tying in the scenario. The dungeons you approach in the latter half of the story will be surprising. There's a section here on fates. It says, the Azim Step fates were popular all over the world, so we ordered the developers to go in that direction. The fates in each area will basically be continuous and explore the lore. For example, the fates in Lakeland will follow the story of the Elf Knights, who used to rule that area. There won't be many small one-shot fates we had in previous areas, which were like small incident occurred here, collect X and give to Y. So yeah, if you're into your fates and the whole progression ultimately rewarding you with something cosmetic at the end, no doubt this is going to be more of that, which is always cool. And now Dengeki get a little bit more information about the New Game Plus section. The initial release will have 3 parts for the main storyline, A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, and Stormblood. This feature also covers job quests and alliance raids. You can toggle things like reset all or mark all as cleared, but obviously not the most recent content. How much they expand on each category depends on the feedback they receive. You will also be able to replay and witness scenes that you could not with the Never-Ending Journal. You can take your time and rewatch old event battles as well. It says here, you cannot just rewatch Haurchefant's scene, you'll need to start from the beginning of Heavensward. They have a flagged copy ready so you can redo past quests when you're in the middle of the 5.0 story. The New Game Plus feature is scheduled for 5.1. So there we go, we got a little bit more information about New Game Plus. There's really not been much floating around of how it works, but at least we know now that that's not going to be out at launch. That's actually going to be in 5.1. 5.1 is absolutely huge, by the way, if you actually look at what's in there. And there's a big section here on Machinist in particular. Machinist adjustments were like a gamble. Machinist had 2 aspects, the gun and machinery weapons, which did not work well with each other throughout 3.0 to 4.5. Back in 1.0, Merylweb used guns and people were expecting a gun-wielding job, so they wanted to answer those demands. When they added a flamethrower in 4.0, some people were mad that their gun job had to use a purge-them-all weapon instead. For 5.0, they threw that idea out of the window and said, let's treat the gun as one of many weapons, and changed it to a job that uses all sorts of weapons. They adjusted it to shift away from the stylish gunman to drills, a robot that dashes into a punch, things that a primary school kid would be obsessed with. Like he said in the beginning, this direction was a gamble, and he was scared of the backlash from machinists who love the current style, but he was relieved when he heard positive reactions from them too. A little bit on the Hall of the Intermediate, they would like to do something about preparing a place for people to practice their jobs, but they weren't able to create any sort of standalone content for 5.0. Instead, they would like players to use the Trust, which you can use over and over again in level 70 to 80 content. Last little bits here, so talking about gear, the tank accessories you can obtain in raids are overall readjusted. They now have 2 materia slots, so they made sure the raid accessories are stronger than the crafted ones in every scenario, which should answer some people's questions about that, and the crafted gear won't have any big changes. In regards to housing, the preview feature will finally be added. Again, they don't talk about it as much, which is a shame. They also say here they will also add a large amount of housing items. Ooh, so you can expect a lot of those videos in the expansion for sure. The Gold Saucer content that was planned for 5.0 has actually been moved to 5.1, and other plans for new content are also waiting in line after that. So I guess when it comes down to it, there's a lot of features that they talked about that they're going to add, but a lot of stuff's been moved to 5.1, and at the minute, 5.1, as I say, is just huge. The amount of stuff in there now, adding Gold Saucer content to it as well. Ooh, it's going to be interesting. And finally, Yoshida has some final words. He says, reaching 16 million players total is an achievement on its own, but we reached the highest amount of current subscriptions before the launch of the expansion, and this usually doesn't happen with MMOs. I suspect that the Warriors of Light are continuing to be passionate about the game and also inviting friends in. The mistake made in 1.0 is what us at Square Enix caused, and the only reason why we've come this far after that failure is thanks to all of the amazing fans around the world. So this time it's our turn to release the expansion and get everyone excited. We squeezed out every single drop to our very limit, so we would like players to enjoy every part of the expansion. When it comes to the MSQ, I'm sure people will have different preferences, but at least it felt like the 5.0 story felt like a Final Fantasy, and I hope people enjoy it. Oh, and one last thing. When you receive a quest, you usually follow the to-do and go to the next destination, but if you talk to the NPCs, you get to hear what we call a hint talk, where someone like Alphino might talk about where they should go and look for whatever. The dialogues aren't included in the journal or to-do list, and we made those small details interesting this time around. You might find some important information from these conversations, so those who are interested in lore are advised to take their time and enjoy these chit-chats. And then he says, please make sure you include this in your interview. So yeah, it was included and we've all heard it now. It's a very interesting set of interviews. They really are focusing on putting all of their effort into this expansion, putting their eggs into one basket, if you will. What we don't want is a completely underwhelming experience, but hopefully not at the cost of the developers' existence themselves. There's a lot of companies out there that focus way too heavily on crunching their employees, and the overall work experience is terrible. So as long as, we don't get repeats of things like people doing stuff in their spare time, unpaid overtime to actually finish things off, then, in general, it'll be really good. And obviously, I will have a live letter summary later this evening when that live letter goes live. So thank you kindly for watching, and I'll see you all next time.